The file came in a manila envelope. No signature, no official transfer memo, just her name, written in black ink across the top. K.D. Turner, Esq. Kendra stared at it for a moment longer than she should have, because this wasn't just any case, it was that case. The one the faculty whispered about in the break room. The one judges rolled their eyes at. The one that had chewed through 4 defense attorneys in 2 years. 2 fired, 1 resigned, 1 still missing from the bar directory. And now, somehow, it was on her desk. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and glanced out the window of her office, bare, practical, nothing like the hardwood and book-laden walls her white colleagues were gifted upon graduation. The city looked the same as it always did at 6:17 p.m., tired, golden, and pretending to care about justice just long enough for rush hour to pass. She turned back to the envelope, opened it, and there it was. State of Louisiana versus Jalen Morris. Charge: first-degree murder. Victim: Whitney Avery, 23. White. Daughter of a retired state senator. Found strangled in her dorm room at 11:42 p.m. No forced entry, no witnesses, only 1 fingerprint. Jalen's, 19 years old, first-generation college student. Black, pre-law. She had read about this case in her second year, watched it get tried in the media, watched every headline spit the same sentence in different fonts. Bright Southern belle murdered by classmate. No one ever called him by name, only by type. Kendra sighed. The weight of the file pressed into her palms, not from its contents but from the silence it had been wrapped in, because this wasn't just about proving a young man innocent. This was about walking into a courtroom that had already decided he wasn't. She closed the file, tapped her fingers twice on the desk, then stood and walked to the wall, an empty space above her license. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small note card. On it, a quote she wrote years ago in Sharpie, faded but still legible. You don't walk into the system to change it. You walk in knowing it will try to change you, and still say no. She pinned it back up, then turned off the light. The next morning, she stepped into the courthouse, hair tied back, suit crisp, eyes already scanning the hallway for who wouldn't look her in the eye. She checked in, gave her name. The clerk glanced at her badge, then blinked in mild surprise. You're taking the Morris case? Kendra nodded. Is that a problem? The clerk hesitated, then said the words she already knew were coming. It's just, no black woman has ever won that case. Kendra's voice was steady. Then it's time someone did. And she walked straight toward the courtroom. Not to be welcomed, not to be respected, but to be counted. There was something about the courtroom air. It didn't move, it didn't shift, it just sat there, like it knew who belonged and who didn't. Kendra stepped inside, her heels sharp against the floor, the echo of every step reminding everyone present that a new presence had entered, one they hadn't rehearsed for. The judge didn't look up when she entered. The court clerk, a woman in her 60s with perfectly permed silver hair, glanced up over her glasses and blinked, twice, before whispering to the bailiff, "And the prosecution?" They smiled. Not kindly, but the kind of smile men offer when they think they've already won and are simply being patient with the formality of your arrival. Kendra took her seat at the defense table. No co-counsel, no intern, just her and the file. Across from her, Assistant District Attorney Reed Callahan, a local legend for being tough but fair, though everyone knew he was mostly just tough when it came to people who looked like Jalen. He leaned forward just enough to be heard. Hope you packed a change of clothes. Trials like this tend to drag. Kendra didn't look at him. I packed the truth, it travels light. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Hollis Gray, a man whose face had never once cracked into a smile on public record, finally looked up. Defense ready? Yes, Your Honor. You're Turner? Yes. First appearance in this courtroom? First of many. He didn't respond, didn't nod, just wrote something in his notebook. She knew better than to wonder what it said. She'd spent years watching men like him write entire verdicts with nothing but facial expressions and quiet pen strokes. The jury wasn't selected yet. Today was the preliminary hearing, procedural, simple. Unless someone made it more, Callahan did. Your Honor, prosecution would like to request the restriction of specific types of character evidence we believe may unnecessarily humanize the defendant. Humanize, because that was the word. As if Jalen's humanity was an obstacle to justice, as if his being a quiet student, never once disruptive, and working 2 part-time jobs to support his mom was unfair. Kendra stood, her voice didn't rise, it filled. Your Honor, I wasn't aware that being seen as human was a disqualifier in your courtroom. If that's the standard, perhaps we should restrict the prosecution's narrative too, since what they're constructing isn't law, it's theater. The room went still. Callahan adjusted his tie. The judge finally looked her in the eye, not with respect, not yet, but with awareness. She had entered. And now, they had to acknowledge she was here. The courtroom buzzed with the low murmur of small talk and shuffled papers as the potential jurors filled the benches. Some looked annoyed, some looked confused, none of them looked ready. Kendra stood near the defense table, eyes scanning the room, not with suspicion but with memory. She had sat on a jury once. She remembered the way people wore their biases like perfume, faint but present, and the longer you stayed, the harder it was to ignore. There were 37 names on the list. 12 would be seated, but Kendra knew before voir dire even began, the jury had already been picked, not by the court, not by Callahan, but by history, by zip codes, by who got a jury duty summons, and who got conveniently overlooked. The judge started the process. Callahan questioned first. His tone was calm, practiced, rehearsed. Would any of you be uncomfortable rendering a verdict based on the evidence presented, without bias? A few nods, a few murmurs of no, sir. The kind of answers that sound good because they've been practiced since middle school civics class. But Kendra noticed something else. When he spoke, the jurors leaned in. When she stood, they leaned back. Her turn. How many of you believe that an innocent person can be made to look guilty? A pause. One hand, slowly. And how many of you believe that someone's face can shape your opinion before a single word is said? 2 hands. And if that face looks like my client's, young, black, from the wrong neighborhood, how sure are you that your first reaction isn't your last? Silence, she let it sit, because silence has weight, and sometimes the absence of answers is the answer. Callahan objected. Your Honor, defense is attempting to inject identity politics. Kendra cut in, calm. I'm attempting to inject reality. It keeps getting rejected. Judge Gray sighed. Watch your line, Ms. Turner. I'm watching theirs. They removed 4 jurors, all people of color. Callahan offered justifications. Tone, lack of neutrality, inconsistent responses. But Kendra knew what it was, and so did the people who were told to go home. By the time the jury was seated, it was mostly white, middle-aged, professional class, the kind who clutch purses harder in elevators and call the police before asking questions. That night, Kendra sat in her apartment, lights low, laptop open. Jalen's photo was on her screen, mugshot. But his eyes weren't fearful. They were tired, like he already knew how this would go. She looked at her reflection in the screen and whispered to herself, "Not this time." The evidence folder felt too organized. Every photo, every report, every timestamp was perfectly in place, too perfectly. And Kendra had been in enough courtrooms to know truth is never that neat. She started with the crime scene photos. Whitney Avery's dorm room was pristine except for the chaos around the body, a knocked-over lamp, scattered papers, and one single fingerprint on the bedroom door handle. Jalen's, just one. Kendra squinted. That didn't make sense. If there was a struggle, if Jalen had entered, why only one print? No prints on the window, none on the desk, none on the lamp. She flipped to the arrest report. The time of death was listed as 11:42 p.m. Jalen's arrest occurred at 1:06 a.m. in his own apartment 11 blocks away. He was alone, said he'd been studying for his sociology midterm. She checked his class schedule. The exam was real. His classmate Alina had messaged him at 10:55 p.m. He replied at 10:56. So why did the prosecution claim he had no alibi? She opened the timeline chart. The prosecution's case relied on 3 things. 1. The fingerprint. 2. A missing time gap in Jalen's phone activity. 3. A witness who said they saw someone matching his description near the dorm. Kendra paused. Matching description? She flipped to the witness statement, anonymous, given to police 3 days after the murder, said only that they saw a black male wearing a dark hoodie near Avery Hall. No face. No direct contact. Just the silhouette of guilt. She dug deeper, pulled public security camera requests. The prosecution had submitted 3 angles from campus surveillance, but Kendra found 5 listed in the university's system. 2 were missing. She called the tech desk. "Can you confirm which cameras were down the night of October 8th? There was a pause. None. All cameras were operational. Why? Then why are feeds from Lot C and Southgate missing from the case file? Another pause. They were never requested. Kendra felt her pulse slow, not speed up, because anger makes you reactive. But this was surgical. Somebody hadn't made a mistake. Somebody had made a decision. She printed everything, labeled a new folder, what they left out. Then she opened her notepad and wrote a single line at the top. They needed a killer. They didn't need to be right. The name was Marcus Delane, 21, sociology major. Same campus, same year, same dorm building, but opposite wing. The prosecution had listed him as an eyewitness who claimed to see Jalen outside Whitney's dorm window on the night of the murder. One glance at his written statement and Kendra already knew it wasn't written by him, it was written for him. Too polished, too structured, too convenient. She called him in for a voluntary pre-interview. Neutral space, no pressure. Just 2 chairs and a closed door. Marcus walked in with the nervous energy of someone who had rehearsed every word he planned to say. Twice. He didn't sit right away, didn't look her in the eye. Kendra stayed silent. And sometimes silence is the loudest question. "I just want to help," he said first. "That's why I gave the statement. I thought I should." "You thought you should," Kendra repeated softly. "Or you were told you should." Marcus hesitated. "I saw someone. I think I did. It was late, I was tired. It looked like him. Maybe." "What were you doing outside at 11:30? "Coming back from a study group." "Alone?" "Yeah. Anyone see you?" "No." "And you saw Jalen, in the dark, through a window, on the 2nd floor, from 30 feet away?" He didn't answer. Kendra leaned forward, voice low. "Marcus, did you really see Jalen, or did you see a black man and connect the rest?" He swallowed, hard. The detective said, "If I testified, it'd be good. For the case, for the school, for her family." "And what about the truth?" "The truth," he said, eyes glassy, "doesn't matter when people are scared." Silence again, but this time it was his. A surrender. Kendra nodded. "I'm not asking you to protect him. I'm asking you to stop protecting the story." He sat back, shoulders down, years older than he was 10 minutes ago. "If I change my statement, I could get in trouble. Or you could keep pretending and let an innocent kid die in prison." He didn't respond, but when he left, he paused at the door. I didn't see his face, not really, just assumed. They needed someone to say it. I was the easiest voice to borrow. He left, and Kendra stayed behind, staring at the chair. "Borrowed voices," she whispered, "build broken verdicts." She opened a new folder, labeled it Silenced Truths, then circled the word retraction, because now the case was cracking, and she knew exactly where to press next. She wasn't supposed to look into his past. It wasn't procedurally relevant. It wasn't part of discovery. And yet, Kendra knew something was off. ADA Reed Callahan had a pattern, and like most patterns in law, it didn't scream. It whispered. She spent 2 days combing through archived case files, public records, bar association summaries. It started subtle. A 2016 drug case, a 17-year-old black teen with no prior record. Found guilty based on anonymous tip and circumstantial possession. Then a 2018 robbery trial, another young black male, convicted with no fingerprints, no DNA, just a frightened witness and a missing camera feed. Each case had something missing, A piece of evidence, a contradictory statement that never made it to trial, a defense attorney who mysteriously dropped out before closing arguments, and in every one of them, Callahan. She built a timeline, color-coded, layered by charge, defendant profile, sentence length. It was unmistakable. Callahan's conviction record was nearly perfect, but disproportionately successful when the defendants were young, black, and without high-powered legal support. And every single one of those convictions had someone testify, had something go missing, had nothing that could be challenged, unless someone actually looked. She met with a former public defender who'd moved out of state, a man named Jackson Price. He remembered Callahan well. He doesn't plant evidence. He plants doubt. He makes people believe they saw something, and he never gets caught. Because he never lies, he just uses people who will. Kendra leaned in. Did you ever call it out? He laughed, bitter. In this county, calling it out is a faster way to get disbarred than stealing money. Kendra left that meeting with her bag heavier. Not from documents, but from weight. The kind that doesn't leave your shoulders even when you're right. That night, she updated the caseboard in her apartment. One column, Jalen Morris. The other, prior cases, Callahan. She connected strings, labeled connections, coached witness, missing feed, judge overlap. And when she stepped back, it didn't look like a coincidence. It looked like a template. She took a photo, printed it, slid it into her trial folder, because when Callahan stood in court tomorrow and smiled that neutral smile, she'd be holding every name he tried to bury, right in her hand. And this time, he wouldn't get to finish the story. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning, almost like it knew something was about to shift. Kendra walked in with 3 folders in her hand, Jalen's file, Callahan's case history, and a sealed envelope labeled Prior Judicial Review. She didn't sit. She waited for Callahan to notice her. He did, and he frowned. Because people like him don't fear opposition. They fear memory. Miss Turner, Judge Gray said, barely glancing up. Are you ready to proceed with cross? Not quite, Your Honor, she replied, stepping forward. Before we continue, the defense would like to motion for a supplemental review on prosecutorial conduct. The room stirred. Callahan stood immediately. Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to derail the proceedings. She's been overreaching since voir dire. Kendra didn't flinch. No, I've been observing, and what I observed is a consistent pattern of behavior. Cases where witnesses retract statements after trial, where evidence disappears, where defendants of a particular demographic end up with the same kind of prosecution without meaningful defense. Gray removed his glasses. Ms. Turner, this court is not the place for personal crusades. We're here to try this case, not review every courtroom you've ever disagreed with. This is the case, Your Honor. She opened the folder. The same techniques Callahan used here were used in 3 other trials in this very court. Same judge, same suppression motions, all leading to convictions based on fear, not fact. Callahan stepped in again. That is enough! Gray banged his gavel. Miss Turner, I am warning you, this is not your lecture hall. She stepped closer. Then maybe it's time this courtroom started learning something. Silence. Then, get back to your seat. The voice cracked like a whip. It wasn't a command. It was a punishment. Kendra stood still. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. But she didn't move either. Instead, she said one sentence, clear even, unshaken. With all due respect, Your Honor, if the courtroom can't handle the truth, maybe it's not justice that's on trial anymore. Maybe it's you. Gasps. The clerk froze mid-typing. Callahan looked stunned. And Judge Gray, he didn't say another word. He simply recessed the court. Outside, Kendra walked into the hall alone. Reporters had started to gather. Whispers flew around like dust. She didn't stop, didn't wave, didn't speak. But in her bag were names, files, voices they thought had been lost. And tomorrow, she wasn't bringing them back in folders, she was bringing them to the stand. The courtroom was full, not just with people, with tension, with breath waiting to be held, with doubt waiting to be shattered. The media had arrived. Reporters lined the back wall. Students from the law school packed the benches. Even Judge Gray's hands were stiffer than usual. Everyone was expecting something, no one knew what. Callahan stood smug at the prosecution table, prepping a new motion to limit character testimony. "Your Honor," he began, "we request the court prohibit the defense from using inflammatory language to sway the jury emotionally." Kendra rose, interrupting. "What the prosecution means, Your Honor, is that he's afraid of what happens when truth becomes more powerful than fear." Judge Gray shot her a warning look. "Ms. Turner, you've had your moment. Sit down." She didn't. She walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, then turned, not to the judge, not to Callahan, but to the jury. 12 people, mostly white, mostly safe, mostly watching her like she was a disruption. She locked eyes with them, and then said the sentence, "You can fake evidence, bribe witnesses, and silence the truth, but you cannot rewrite what justice looks like just because it doesn't look like you." Silence. Even the stenographer stopped typing. Even the clock on the wall felt like it skipped a second. Kendra didn't move, didn't smile. She simply turned back to the defense table and sat. The judge didn't speak. The prosecution didn't rise. The entire courtroom had just shifted. Not because she yelled, but because she said what everyone was too afraid to admit, and she said it in a voice that no one could unhear. Outside the courtroom, by that evening, the line, "You cannot rewrite what justice looks like just because it doesn't look like you," was trending. Tweets, articles, clips on news stations, law students quoting her in Instagram stories. For the first time in the case, and Kendra wasn't defending a client, she was defending a generation. The courthouse steps were louder than ever. By noon, a crowd had gathered, not in protest, in presence. People who'd read the headlines, watched the clip, heard the sentence. Some held signs. Others just stood there silently, arms crossed, watching the building like it owed them something. Inside, Kendra sat in the conference room alone. Phone off, laptop closed, eyes locked on the wall. She was waiting. Not for the next argument, not for the next objection, for the crack, because when a system begins to crack, the truth doesn't walk through the front door, it sneaks in through the side. And that's exactly what happened. A man entered the room, maintenance uniform, badge said J. Alvarez. "Ms. Turner?" She looked up. "Yes?" He handed her a small yellow envelope. No label, no words. "I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did, and I kept it. I figured someone might need it one day." Then he left just like that. She opened the envelope. Inside, a USB. She plugged it into her laptop. There it was, October 8th, 11:35 p.m. Southgate dorm entrance. Camera ID, Lot C, 07. The footage played grainy, but clear. Jalen, walking into his own building. Timestamp, 11:35:42. Time of murder, 11:42. He couldn't have been at the crime scene, not unless he could fly. And yet, this footage had never been in the file, never mentioned in discovery, never submitted into evidence. She checked the system index again. Confirmed what she already knew. This angle had been intentionally excluded, and the only people with access to request footage, Callahan, campus security, lead detective. That made 3 possibilities, and all 3 were guilty, either of framing Jalen or allowing someone else to. She closed the laptop, stood up, and for the first time in weeks, smiled, not because the case was over, but because the system had just blinked. And now, she was going to make it confess. Court was called back into session at exactly 9 a.m., but the room didn't feel the same. It felt expectant. Reporters were already scribbling notes before anyone spoke. Law students lined the walls, silent. And Kendra? She was ready. Judge Gray adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Turner, the court understands you've submitted a late-stage motion to introduce new video evidence?" Kendra stood, voice clear. "Yes, Your Honor. The footage is from campus security, time-stamped, authenticated, and it directly contradicts the prosecution's timeline of events." She handed over a copy to the clerk. "It places the defendant in a different location 7 minutes before the murder." Gray raised a brow. And why exactly was this only now discovered? Because someone didn't want it found. Callahan stood sharply. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a blatant attempt to ambush the court with unvetted materials. It's unverifiable, uncorroborated, and likely tampered with. It came directly from the campus server, Kendra replied. Same system the prosecution used for their footage, except this clip wasn't included in discovery. The defense didn't omit it. The prosecution never requested it. Gasps echoed from the back. Callahan snapped. "This is absurd. Your Honor, she's accusing the state of obstruction." "No," Kendra cut in. "I'm accusing you." Silence. Judge Gray didn't speak, didn't move. Kendra walked slowly to the jury. "I want you to ask yourself this. Why would the prosecution withhold video that proves where Jalen was? And if the state can bury this, what else have they buried? In this case, or every case that's looked just like it?" Callahan slammed a folder shut. "She's turning this into a spectacle. This isn't justice, it's a circus." Kendra turned to him, still calm. "If exposing the truth feels like a circus, maybe it's because too many clowns are wearing suits." The room froze. Gray's gavel hit once, twice. "Enough, both of you." But only one of them sat down quietly. Only one of them didn't need to raise his voice to sound dangerous, and it wasn't Kendra. The footage was entered into the record. Gray didn't strike it. He didn't have the stomach for that fight, not with the cameras watching, not with the people on the steps outside, and for the first time, Callahan looked cornered. The jury had changed. Kendra could feel it before anyone said a word. They sat up straighter. They looked at her when she spoke. And most importantly, they didn't look at Callahan anymore. Day 3 of evidence review, Kendra called her first rebuttal witness, Detective Arnold Pierce, lead investigator, 30 years in the force, and the man who couldn't find the missing footage. He took the stand, calm, rehearsed. "We collected every relevant security feed from campus to the best of our ability." Kendra stepped forward. "Is Lot C07 not relevant? It's across campus. Yet it shows my client entering his dorm 7 minutes before the murder. That video was never brought to our attention, but your signature is on the footage request form, and Lot C was excluded by name." Pierce froze. "Must have been an oversight. 3 murders, same precinct, same omission, 3 black defendants, same footage gap." Kendra turned to the jury. "How many oversights does it take before it stops being a mistake and starts being a method?" Silence. Next she called Marcus Delane, the so-called eyewitness. He walked slowly to the stand, pale hands shaking. Kendra spoke gently. "Do you remember what you told me in our interview?" He nodded. "I said I didn't actually see his face. I just assumed because of the hoodie, because I was scared, because someone told me he looked guilty." "Who told you that?" "Detective Pierce and Mr. Callahan. They said the Avery family deserved closure, that if I could help make that happen, it'd be the right thing." The courtroom broke. One juror whispered something. Another looked down at his lap. Even Judge Gray shifted uncomfortably. Callahan stood to object, but he didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say. Kendra walked to the center of the courtroom, her voice steady. "You were told black meant guilty. You were told justice had a shape, a skin tone, a story." She turned to the jury. "But justice isn't a shape. It's not a shortcut, and it never asked to be rewritten by fear." When she sat down, the silence in the room wasn't about hesitation anymore. It was about recognition. They had seen the lie. Now all that was left was to say it out loud. The room was still when the jury returned. No one shifted. No one whispered. Not even Callahan. He sat motionless, hands folded, lips pressed together like he was bracing for a wave he couldn't stop. Kendra, calm but unreadable, stood with her hands at her sides. She didn't look at the jury. She looked at Jalen, and Jalen, after all the silence, the chains, the stares, finally looked back. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Gray asked. "We have, Your Honor." "Please read it." "On the charge of first-degree murder in the case of State versus Jalen Morris, we find the defendant not guilty." A single exhale left Kendra's lips. Not a smile, not a fist pump, just a breath. Jalen closed his eyes, then opened them again, like he wasn't sure if he'd heard it right. Like freedom was a sound that needed repeating. Callahan stood up. No words, no reaction. He walked out the side door the same way he had after every conviction, but this time he wasn't walking out with a win. He was walking out with a shadow behind him, and a record someone would finally question. Outside, the crowd erupted. Not in cheers, not in chants, just silence. The powerful kind, the kind that made headlines. Kendra didn't speak to the press. She didn't need to. Because that morning on the steps of the courthouse, a group of young black girls stood in a line, each holding a copy of the verdict, and one of them wore a shirt that said, "No black woman had ever won this case, until she did."